All right, Braves fans, in this episode of State of the Braves, we are going to discuss the Braves outfield, how they performed in 2024, the injuries that they also had to deal with, and what we can look forward to moving forward in 2025. We'll also get into the Braves hiring a new hitting coach in Tim Hyers, and also how Braves fans should feel about Freddie Freeman probably being the World Series MVP with the Los Angeles Dodgers. All right, let's get into it. All right, guys. So, like I said, the Braves have quickly moved on from firing their old hitting coach and Kevin Seitzer. Again, we talked about that not necessarily being the answer or that he was the problem, but maybe it was good to have a new voice. So they move on from Seitzer, and they have quickly hired Tim Hyers, who has had some success for sure, especially some team success. Hyers as a coach, as a hitting coach, has won 2 World Series championships. First with the 2018 Red Sox, and most recently with the 2023 Texas Rangers. Again, he's coming from the Rangers. Apparently, he is from the Atlanta area, probably has some ties. I think he was actually had some role with the Dodgers when Anthopoulos was briefly with the Dodgers, so maybe they know each other from that stop. But again, coming from some success. Now, the Rangers did fall back to earth this year. That wasn't necessarily anything that Hyers, did wrong, but he's overseen some pretty good offenses over the years, over his tenures with these two pretty successful organizations. And coming in, he's already made a few comments that seem to hint that he could bring a dedication to maybe a little better two-strike approach for the Braves. Situational hitting, being better in situational spots. Now, we also know, especially from Chipper Jones's recent comments about Seitzer, that Seitzer was also dedicated to that. So the bigger question is, does bringing in Hyers, who, is a new voice and maybe has some different ideas from Seitzer, will bringing him in mean a shift in organizational philosophy or organizational approach to these things? And that is the bigger question to me. A great coach can definitely bring some new things. Maybe he can make some adjustments to Matt Olson's stance, or maybe he can say some things that just click a little bit better to bring some individual success to certain players. But ultimately, my bigger question is, will the organization embrace, again, we're not talking about throwing away a home run hitting approach or an aggressive approach, but some shifting in the around the edges of what the Braves need to do. Obviously, as we've said multiple times, we'll continue to say it, getting healthy is probably the number one thing that can happen. And Hyers, I'm sure, is very excited to work with what should be a prolific offense in 2025. The other thing I wanted to just briefly mention in this episode that, again, is going to be mostly focused on the Braves outfield and what they need to do for 2025. But Freddie Freeman, guys, I mean, as a Braves fan, you can't help but be, on one hand, conflicted by Freddie Freeman and his success in the World Series. It is, to me, a great, or maybe great is the wrong word. It is a fitting cap to the 2024 year, a year that's been so frustrating, so difficult in so many ways to watch the Braves and their struggles and their injuries, and then to see Freddie Freeman, of all people, very likely be the World Series MVP. He's hit 3 home runs in the first 3 games of the World Series, all being Dodgers victories. So, look, I'm not going to turn this. I think a lot of Braves fans are struggling with this, rightfully so. It brings up old memories. It makes you feel like he should still be a Brave, and then other people other Braves fans even get mad at that. Guys, we should move on. I totally understand both sides of that. Where the vitriol should not be targeted is Matt Olson. Look, he had his struggles this year, but he doesn't have anything to do with Freddie Freeman's success. I said when Freeman moved on to the Dodgers, I'm going to continue to root for Freeman because I love the guy. He's one of my favorite Braves, one of my favorite players ever. He is total class. We saw that this year with his family and all the things they went through with his son and that illness, and then his struggles with that pretty bad ankle injury. And then suddenly World Series rolls around and he's just in one of those zones that, as Braves fans, we've seen. We know that he's a Hall of Fame player. He's probably proving it on a bigger stage because, of course, as annoying as it is when it's Dodgers and Yankees, there seems to be more eyeballs on the World Series. So he is, for the nominal fan who doesn't pay much attention, he's proving it to those people. I think in many ways I've seen some baseball guys out there like Jason Stark and others, Buster Olney, basically saying if he wasn't already a lock for a Hall of Famer, this performance is doing it. And, as a fan of Freddie Freeman, that makes me feel good. I'm really glad for that. It's at the same time, right, as a Braves fan, it's really hard. And this was the hardest part, or one of the harder parts about Freeman leaving, is that he wasn't just leaving. He was going somewhere, and the destination he went to was the Los Angeles Dodgers. And so, to have to deal with the Braves not being there, they had a team that was capable of going to the World Series, and from the beginning of spring training said World Series or bust. So not only are the Braves not there, but Freddie Freeman and the Dodgers are there, and Freeman is basically carrying the Dodgers to a World Series championship here in this World Series. So it's a tough pill to swallow as a Brave, as a Braves fan, I should say. Hoping that Freddie could still be a Brave, and we know that he's not. We do have to move on from that, but it's really hard to move on when you're constantly reminded and constantly have to, see it out there on Twitter or X or whatever you're following the World Series on. If you're watching the games, it's hard for me to sit down and watch full games when the Braves aren't there, and you kind of feel like in many ways they should be there. But yeah, I do feel good for Freddie Freeman. I will continue to root for him, but it's hard to root for the Dodgers. I wouldn't say I'm rooting for them. I kind of am indifferent to that part of it, but here we are. We're hoping that Freddie can probably win an MVP, a World Series MVP, and that the Braves can be there in 2025 and make their own memories and do some special things next year. So, okay, well, let's move past that. I'm not going to tell you Braves fans how to feel about that. I'm pretty conflicted myself. So let's move on to the meat of this episode, analyzing the 2024 Braves outfield and what we see for the Braves outfield moving forward. So let's start. Last episode we really focused in on the infield. The Braves infield was really disappointing in a lot of ways in 2024 after a tremendous year in which they were all All-Stars in 2024. Now, for 2023, for the Braves outfield, it was all about Ronald Acuna, right? And his amazing year. Ronald Acuna coming into 24, you just felt so good. He's coming off of an MVP season, but I mean, that underplays it, right? A 40-70 year, a historic year, just kind of proved to everybody once and for all he is a superstar. And then, of course, we know the knee injury. He got off to a slow start to begin with, and then the knee injury. Ronald came into this year with a Fangraph WAR projection of 7.4, which is just off the charts for any kind of projection, right? So the promise was so high. Harris appeared to be on the verge of an all-star breakout year. Year one, of course, he comes up halfway through the year and is pretty tremendous and wins the Rookie of the Year. And then in year two, he deals with some injuries and a slow start, and then really comes on super strong in the second half. And so it just seemed like, okay, this is going to be the year. He puts it all together. He plays a full year. And we know that hamstring wouldn't hold up enough to allow him to do that. So he came into the year with a Fangraph projection WAR of 4.2, which is also like all-star level. That's what you're expecting. And then Kelnick is coming in not with necessarily the same high expectations, but a lot of promise still, right? This is a guy that was a high draft pick, a top prospect. His projection was low. Fangraph's projection of only 0.8 WAR, but you felt like that was low. I felt like it was low. I felt like he could do a 2 or maybe even a 3 WAR season if things kind of broke right for him. But even with that low projection, that's a total FWAR projection with these three of 12.4. That would be pretty awesome, right? But of course, like I said, that did not happen. Ronald Acuna's ACL injury, the nagging hamstring injury of Michael Harris, these injuries decimated the Braves outfield, which of course we know was a common theme for this 2024 team. And then Kelnick, he had kind of like one great month, but otherwise was pretty darn underwhelming for most of the year. He finally got benched basically in the last month of the year for Ramon Laureano, who was playing well. And I was glad when that finally happened. It just kind of seemed like an obvious decision to make. And so there you have it, right? The Braves outfield on opening day was Acuna, Harris, and Kelnick. It just looked like a pretty dynamic, young, talented outfield. And the Braves postseason outfield was Harris was there after coming back from injury, but then Laureano and Jorge Soler, who had been acquired at the trade deadline. So a very different outfield than what the Braves expected. And even with that opening day outfield, you also got to put Adam Duvall in there, right? Kelnick Duvall was supposed to be the platoon. Of course, Duvall had a horrendous year, never got on track after signing really late with the Braves and not really having a full spring training. So maybe that's what threw him off, or not having regular at bats. But man, he never got going. So ultimately, what seemed like an incredibly good and honestly, I think was an incredibly good Braves outfield. Ultimately, Harris ends up leading the Braves outfielders in total WAR for the year with just 2.0 WAR. Ramon Laureano contributed 1.1 WAR, and then Ronald added 1 WAR before he had gone down with injuries. Those were your three leading outfielders in terms of wins above replacement for the Braves. And man, Laureano was kind of a saving grace for this team, and basically came out of nowhere, having a terrible start to the year with Cleveland. And he was pretty darn good with the Braves once he got there. Thank goodness he showed up. He had a couple of blunders in the outfield, but offensively, and for the most part defensively, he was really good. So Jared Kelnick, again, I thought at the beginning of the year a 0.8 WAR was underplaying what he was going to do. But guess what? He only added a meager 0.5 wins above replacement to this team. Again, Adam Duvall was even worse, one of the worst players in all of baseball. I'm not trying to be harsh, but that's just true. He had a negative 1.0 WAR season in over 300 plate appearances. And then it's not done there. The Braves only got 0.4 wins above replacement from Jorge Soler after he arrived after the trade deadline, and this is insane, a negative 0.7 wins above replacement from Eddie Rosario, and that is in under 100 at bats. So basically, I think it was 84 at bats that Rosario ended up having in his return from or return with the Braves, and he was terrible the whole time. And of course, a lot of that is also from his bad fielding as well. So to say that the Braves outfield was not good this year and that it underperformed would be a massive understatement. I said this about the infield, but it's true about the outfield too. How did this team make the playoffs? I mean, it was just all about the pitching, guys. I mean, the pitching absolutely carried this team, dragged this team into the playoffs. And you can put maybe the pitching plus Ozuna, right? Drag this team into the playoffs. Outside of getting back to the outfield, outside of Ramon Laureano, none of Anthopoulos' moves to patch up this outfield seemed to work. And I mean, you could include the offseason moves with Kelnick and Duvall, right? I know that in 2021 he had a magic wand, and he made some really good moves on the pitching side of things in the offseason too, of course, with Sale and Lopez, but things just did not work out well for Anthopoulos' moves in the outfield this time around. So that leaves us with some question marks going into 2025. Number one, when will Ronald Acuna be ready to come back? And what might they do if he's not ready to return as the season gets underway? It sounds more and more likely that they're going to slow play his return from injury this time. And so I think it's a likelihood that he won't be ready in April when the season starts? And then even with Ronald and Michael Harris fully healthy, what do the Braves do in left field? That's the other big question mark I have for the outfield. So if Ronald isn't fully healthy to start the year, let's talk about that potentiality. So Ronald has stated multiple times that he kind of rushed back from his first ACL injury, that he doesn't want to do that. He wants to be patient and do things the right way. And you can certainly appreciate that. And we would also all remember that Ronald did not look himself when he did come back from injury the first time. It took a long time to get back to Ronald being Ronald again. So, while the mental hurdle of trusting his knee, I think that's going to be probably a little easier for him to deal with since he's been through it before. And plus, I think the impact of this knee could be a little less because it's not that drive leg. The knee that it's not his back knee. It's not that knee that needs to drop and drive in his stance. So being the front knee, I think it actually does help a good bit. But all that being said, I think he and the Braves are still going to be really careful with him coming back and probably slow play this thing. So again, if we go with the assumption that Ronald doesn't play until, let's say, May 1st or the middle of May or later, then the Braves will need a solid outfielder, probably better than just a fourth outfielder to play in right field, right? If you got a guy playing full time, basically for a month and a half, maybe even 2 months, you need that guy to really step in and contribute in a big way. So I think Ramon Laureano does fit the bill here in a lot of ways. He makes sense. He's proven to the Braves that he can play every day and contribute. So I think you bring him back in his final arbitration year, he would make about $6 million next year. And I do think he's far better than just a fourth outfielder. And then if Ronald comes back and you filled your left field position, which we're about to talk about, then he's a great fourth outfielder. And if you do have other injuries, he can play all three positions. He could fill in any one of those spots. After seeing Jorge Soler's defense in 2024 and actually lack of offense too, it's kind of hard for me to imagine that they're going to turn back to Jorge Soler in this kind of role, just Soler playing a month and a half and then being your fourth outfielder. He doesn't give you any defensive value, to say the least. So it just doesn't make sense to me that he would be used in that situation. So if Laureano ends up being your solution here, which I really think that will be the case, then you need a full-time left fielder, right? Laureano's kind of working in this position in right field, filling in for Ronald. So what about left field? To my memory, the Braves didn't once play Jorge Soler in left field in 2024. There's a lot more area to cover in Atlanta in left field. So that's kind of interesting to me. He was totally a right fielder when he was out there. And then, of course, they were also subbing him out by the 6th or 7th inning in almost every game. So unless the Braves choose to keep Soler in right and move Ronald to left, which I don't even know why I'm mentioning that. I just don't think that's really hard to imagine that they would move Ronald, especially coming off injury. So I don't think Soler makes a ton of sense on this roster. I really don't. He's really a DH. Of course, you have, outside of Shohei Ohtani, you have the best DH in baseball probably. Again, Soler didn't really hit that well when he came back. I mean, we all love Soler for everything he's done as a Brave, his heroics in the 2021 World Series. But on this roster, I'm not sure Soler makes a ton of sense. His entire value is about hitting home runs and getting on base, taking walks, right? He's always had a pretty high on base percentage and a big slugging percentage, but he only hit 22 home runs last year. That is definitely a down year from what he had done in Miami the year before. So if he's not hitting home runs and getting on base consistently, you really don't need to have him on your team because, again, he's a really bad defender, and I think he proved that when he came into Atlanta after the trade deadline. So what they really need is a left fielder who can cover some ground in the outfield and consistently support the offense. Okay, support the offense. And what I mean by that is, this is me. This is me talking, not necessarily what I think the Braves will do. But I would prefer someone with a little higher on base percentage, a little higher hit tool, kind of a more all around hitter. I mean, it's great to bring in some power, but not, I don't think they necessarily need a pure power guy and I think that's going to balance the offense more than just a pure power, high strikeout rate guy. Um, this is why I think Soler actually is kind of likely to be traded in the offseason. Maybe I shouldn't say likely because sometimes what I'm going to do is not what Anthopoulos is going to do. But that's what I would do. I would trade Soler in the offseason. As much as Anthopoulos stated that Soler was in their long-term plans when he traded for him, it just doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't look like he fits on this roster very well. Now, Jared Kelenic, he fits half the profile of what the Braves need. He did prove that he can play a really good left field defense last year. The metrics were mixed on him, but the eye test was that Kelenic was a pretty good defensive left fielder. He has a really good arm, but offensively, he just didn't prove it, right? Low walk rate, high strikeout rate, and just, inconsistency. So Laureano might be your best internal option, but again, if you start him in right field, then you got to have someone else starting the year in left field, at least to bridge the gap to get to Ronald. Maybe you ride with Kelenic in left, Laureano in right to start the year, but that's not exactly a murderer's row. Right? It's not endearing a lot of confidence to me of what you're starting the year with, and you don't want to start slow. You want to get going from the beginning. So what would I do in left field? I've already made this point, but I think I would bring Laureano back as your fourth outfielder as a fill-in for Ronald until he's ready to go. And then I would actively go out and search for a full-time starting left fielder. I advocated for this at the in the offseason last year, and then they went out and got Kelenic, which at the time I was fine with. I kind of liked the idea of betting on a guy with high potential, but it just didn't seem to work out, right? He didn't seem to prove it. I'm not saying he can never figure it out, but just from what I've seen, I don't have a ton of confidence that Jared Kelenic is going to be your left fielder of the future. And so, yes, I would trade Jorge Soler. Kelenic has options, so you don't have to trade him. You could send him down to AAA and see if he can figure things out, or you could trade him. And there probably are some teams that would still take him, and you could get something back for him. I'm not saying you're going to get huge returns for Soler or Kelenic right now, but maybe you get a little something out of that, and you can move on. So if you are looking for a full-time left fielder, who's out there? Let's go over some free agent targets first, and then I'll give you guys a couple trade targets as well. So in terms of free agent targets, let's start with Jurickson Profar. This guy, San Diego had a career year with the Padres. He's a pure free agent, but he signed a 1-year deal with the Pods, kind of a prove it year, and he did prove it. He was an all-star, like I said, a career year. But I do think the Padres are going to look to bring him back. He kind of became a fan favorite for the Padres. And of course, they had a lot of success and things just kind of clicked well for San Diego this year. So I think he's probably not going to be available, but I do really like his profile. He's a great average and high on base guy. He brings really good defense. I don't think you're going to have to sign him to a really long-term deal. He's in his early 30s. I think he's 31. So he's not old, but I don't think you're signing him to like a 5 or 6 year deal. But maybe someone would be willing to do that. And then of course the Braves would definitely be out at that point. The only thing that, gives me a lot of pause with him is you're buying really high on the guy. Anytime a guy has a career year before free agency, it just makes me nervous. But on paper, from what he did for the Padres last year, he would fit great in Atlanta's left field. The next guy I'll mention, but I don't really love, is Alex Verdugo. He's been a guy, his reputation is good fielder, not as great of a hitter, maybe decent, but not great. And I gotta be honest with you guys, with the Yankees, he just did not have a good year, and has never been a big offensive difference maker. His defense is actually going down, so I would not go after Alex Verdugo. Next guy available is Jesse Winker. You guys might remember he was on my list of guys to go after at the trade deadline. He is kind of a subpar defender, but I do love his hitting profile. Very high walk rate, high on base percentage, solid contact guy with some power. You know, he might hit you 15 to 20 home runs, but I doubt this is going to happen either. You know, the Braves could have gotten him for next to nothing at the trade deadline, and they didn't go after him and went after Soler instead. And this is when they needed a guy to go out and hit righties. Again, I mentioned that throughout the year that they were a lot weaker against right-handed hitters, and so they still didn't go after him when it just made a lot of sense to target him. And I wonder why that is. I think Winker does have a reputation as not a great dude in the clubhouse. And he also had some like really weird antics with the Mets when they did go after him. I mean, just he hit a walk-off home run and acted like an, I'm sorry, but kind of like an idiot when, you know, so I just wonder if there's something there that the Braves feel like he doesn't fit in the clubhouse for whatever reason. I'm not saying he's a bad guy, but maybe there's something there. Tyler O'Neill is the next guy. He played with the Red Sox, was with the Cardinals before that. He had actually a pretty big year, even though he struggled through some injuries. But this dude does have a huge strikeout rate. He has a good walk rate. He hit 31 home runs in just 113 games with the Red Sox. So the power is very real. Defense is kind of subpar. But again, with O'Neill, you're kind of getting more of some of the same of what's already in the Braves lineup. Huge strikeout rate, good walk rate, big power. Teoscar Hernandez, of course, he looks like he's about to win a World Series with the Dodgers. I would not be shocked if they bring him back because that's looked like a really good fit for him. He's played really well for them. So I do wonder if he's going to actually be available. He had basically the best year of his career this year. His strikeout rate dropped by like 6 percentage points and his walk rate doubled. And this really turned him into, you know, a barely above average hitter to a really good hitter with the Dodgers this year. He was an all-star. The question is, did the Dodgers fix something with him? You know, does he continue that, or is this just a one-off? Okay, let's get to two big trade targets, and then I'll tell you guys what I would do. The first big name is Luis Robert, of course, with the historically bad Chicago White Sox. He has 2 years of control left at $20 million apiece for 2025 and 2026 before becoming a free agent. So this guy is massively talented. He's a big time, especially offensive talent. Robert would be also pretty excellent defensively in left field. I think the White Sox have played him more in center field. But it's all about health with Robert. He has never been able to stay on the field consistently. He's had one full non-injured year, and that was 2023. It was a great year. He hit 264, 38 home runs, a 4.9 WAR season. So really good player, all-star player if he's healthy. And, you know, the Braves could roll the dice on him for 2 years, and, you know, maybe you get a year and a half or 2 years of health for him. Maybe he's a guy that misses significant time, but you get him healthy by the playoffs, and you know you ride that. So I could kind of see them doing this if they're willing to pay the price, but he's going to be pretty expensive. The other guy is a guy that I also really liked at the trade deadline this past year. Don't know if he was actually on the market or not, but that's Brent Rooker for the Oakland A's. Oh, can we call them the Oakland A's anymore? I guess not, just the A's. Sorry, Oakland. Brent Rooker is squarely in his prime. He's 30. He's likely to make only $3.5 million, which is such a steal in arbitration this year, and he's controllable through 2027. But it's that kind of salary and that kind of performance that he's had that is going to make him super expensive. So that's the hurdle here. Yeah, he's going to be pretty costly in a trade. Rooker is a late bloomer, but this is not a one-off. He backed up his breakout year in 2023, in which he hit 30 home runs, with an even better year in 2024. He hit 293 with a 365 on base percentage, 39 home runs. It's not wrong to say he was one of the best hitters in all of the American League last year, maybe top 5 hitter. Very similar year to Ozuna. You're basically getting another Ozuna in your lineup if you brought in Brent Rooker. He had a 5.1 WAR season according to Fangraphs. The big question with him is, can he play left field? He's mostly been a DH with Oakland. Again, that's already kind of the issue with Soler, though I would say with Rooker, he's a much better all-around hitter than Soler. I mean, Soler at his best maybe could do what Rooker did last year, but I think Rooker, he's a little younger, and he's done it for 2 straight years. So I kind of like what he brings there. He's also kind of known for being a great guy off the field. So I think that would be actually a really exciting addition for the Braves if he can play left field. But both Rooker and Robert will be very expensive on the trade market. This would be a big deal for the Braves to make. It would be an all-in kind of approach, which they should be all in, right? But, do the Braves have the kind of prospect capital that it will take to bring in one of these guys? And will they even prioritize left field is the other question. I think ultimately, what would I do? Okay. I think Profar makes a ton of sense, but like I said, he makes me nervous. I think it's a little bit of a risk. A guy who's 31 years old, he's had a couple of good years, but never anything like he had last year. So can he back it up? I don't know. I think you would have to assume he would take one step back, but still be a pretty decent player. The Braves, in terms of these 2 trade candidates, they do have a trade history with both the White Sox and the A's. So, maybe that makes it a little easier to get something else done. So I don't hate either of those trade targets at all. I would be very excited for either of those guys. I'm just not sure the Braves have enough prospect capital to make it happen, especially if they get in a bidding war with other teams. I also, if you look back to my last episode, I would really love for them to trade for a shortstop. So I kind of think that shortstop might end up being a higher priority for them over the offseason, and it might be for me as well. Maybe you use that trade capital for a shortstop, but if they can't get one, maybe they pivot to improve their outfield. So if they spend their capital on a shortstop and don't like the free agent options, then we might be in line for a Soler Kelenic platoon. I would not be super excited about that. You'd be really mostly banking on Soler being able to bounce back from what was kind of a subpar season. But again, it just doesn't make a ton of sense for them to keep Soler and Ozuna both on this roster. So guys, that's the Braves outfield. And of course, let's end with, please may Ronald Acuna be fully healthy and fully back next year. And honestly, a whole bunch of issues go away if you have a healthy Ronald Acuna. So we can hope for that. And man, that would also make for a much more exciting, fun season for the Braves. So guys, I appreciate y'all tuning in for another episode of Stay the Braves. I'll talk to you soon.